Good afternoon. So we will carry on with what we have been discussing, the absorption and the elasticity approaches to balance of payment, a complementary view. We worked on the equation relating the changes in income to autonomous changes in expenditure and autonomous change in net exports. And after discussing the Marshall-Lerner-Robinson condition, now this DNA term is further bifurcated into purely autonomous term, which is DNA dash, and a term which has the Marshall-Lerner-Robinson condition even star plus E2 minus 1, where even star is the foreign import demand elasticity, E2 is the home import demand elasticity, and even star plus E2 minus 1. This E pi is greater than 0. That means we are assuming that the Marshall-Lerner condition holds. So if you work on this equation, you get a relationship between the policy induced expenditures and the changes in exchange rates, purely autonomous change in net exports, private changes in expenditures, and the changes in the target level of income. When I say target level of income, it's the income which is required to maintain the internal balance. This is the equation for the YY curve here, which is upward sloping. So it shows different combinations of the expenditure policy and nominal and real exchange rates. There is no difference between nominal and real exchange rates here because we have assumed prices to be a constant in home and foreign. So expenditure policy is tax, interest rates. So as we move up in the y-axis, you see an increase in tax rates and interest rates. It leads to more restrictive expenditure policies. And if you move on the x-axis on the right hand side, you see depreciation of the exchange rates. Now this shows that there is a direct relationship. This YY curve shows different combinations of exchange rates and tax rates or interest rates which will maintain internal balance. The internal balance is the income at the full employment level of output. So say for example, if there is a depreciation of the currency, you need reduction in policy induced expenditures to maintain internal balance. So when I say reduction in policy induced expenditures, it means that the tax rate or interest rate should be raised to reduce the policy induced expenditures. Now the economic logic is that if you devalue your currency, there is a shift of expenditures from foreign to domestic goods. And when there is a shift from foreign to domestic goods, this leads to the changes in incomes. The incomes go up. Now when the incomes go up, it goes beyond the income which corresponds to the full employment level of output. So the only way to bring it back to equilibrium is through reducing the policy induced expenditures or by raising the tax rates or interest rates. That's why you see an upward sloping YY curve. If you see this equation has also the shift factors, which are these. So any changes in in these will bring about shifts in the YY curve, because the YY curve is a relationship between the expenditure policy and nominal and real exchange rates. All other factors are shift factors. If you work on the FF curve shows different combinations of expenditure policy and nominal and real exchange rate, which brings about external balance. External balance is when you have a balance of payment equilibrium. When do you have a balance of payment equilibrium? When the current account balance, which is N, is matched by the capital inflows, so N plus K is equal to 0. Or the sum of the autonomous receipts is equal to the sum of autonomous payments, then only you have a balance of payment equilibrium. So you can see a relationship between policy induced expenditures and the exchange rate. If you devalue your currency, that means there is a shift of expenditure from foreign to domestic goods. It leads to an improvement in the balance of payments. So it leads to a surplus in balance of payments. Now, if you have to curb the surplus in balance of payments, then you need to raise your policy induced expenditures. And you can raise your policy induced expenditures by reducing tax rates and interest rates. So that's the reason that if you move to the right, that means if you increase the exchange rates, you need to reduce the tax or the interest rates to achieve the external balance. As in the case of the YY curve, here all other terms, be it the capital inflows, be it the expenditures, the private expenditures, be it the purely autonomous change in net exports, these are all shift factors. They will all lead to a shift of the FF curve, either upwards. If it moves upwards, then it means that you adopt more restrictive expenditure policies. If it moves downwards, you adopt less restrictive expenditure policies. So then we had discussed two shocks which happened in the economy. The first shock was the increase in expenditures, and then we saw that if you cut back your expenditures, you will bring back your economy back to equilibrium. So by changing one instrument, you can focus on your two targets. This, and then I added a rider saying that this is an exception. Otherwise, the number of policy instruments should be at least as large as the number of policy targets. Then we also discussed a switch in expenditure from say domestic to foreign goods. So the only way that you can bring back your economy is to switch back, that is from foreign, you switch back your expenditure from foreign to domestic goods. This is equivalent to saying that you depreciate your currency. Now this is thing that you need to understand. When you depreciate your currency, you switch your expenditures from foreign to domestic goods. Remember in your own country, the price of imports in terms of domestic currency goes up. Okay? So if that happens, you try to move out of imports and concentrate on your domestic production. Then another thing which happens is that your exports in terms of foreign currency, the price of exports in terms of foreign currency goes down. So as that happens, and if if the law of demand holds, if the price of exports in terms of foreign currency goes down, then the demand for it goes up. So in both the cases, you are shifting or switching your expenditures from foreign to domestic goods, because imports have become dearer, so you start preferring your own goods, and foreigners have started liking your own good because the prices have gone down. So there is a reorientation, you start focusing more on your own product. So in this case, when you there was a shock in the sense that there was a switch in expenditure from domestic to foreign goods. The only way that you can bring the economy back to equilibrium, that is maintain both internal and external balance, is to depreciate your currency. You switch your expenditures from foreign to domestic goods. And we saw shifting of both YY and the FF curves, and we saw that you depreciate your currency, you change one policy instrument, you achieve two policy targets. This was an exception. Again, I added a rider saying that this is an exception. So this is what we covered in our last lecture. Today we are going to move beyond that. We are going to discuss two more shocks which happen in the economy. One is the increase in labor force, and the other is the increase in capital flows. So when there is an increase in labor force, if for example India starts producing more of IT personnel, skilled manpower increases in India, which we have seen over the years that the skilled manpower has gone up. How will it have an impact on the economy? Now looking at this equation, this increase in labor force increases this target level of income, which is YT. It increases this target level of income. When I say target level of income, it's that level of income which is required for having full employment level of output. So when this goes up, this equation shows that DAG should go up. If DAG has to go up, then this YY curve has to shift down, right? Because you need to have less restrictive expenditure policy to maintain internal balance. And the logic is that if you need to increase the target level of incomes, you need to reduce taxes or interest rates, or adopt less restrictive expenditure policy for achieving higher level of the targeted income, higher level of Ys. So as the YY curve shifts down, you see two things happening. One, you need to reduce the tax and interest rates to maintain the internal balance, and the other is that you depreciate your currency to take care of the balance of payment disequilibrium which happens due to an increase in labor force. Now this is different from the first two cases that we discussed, because here you are changing two instruments, one expenditure policy, the other nominal and real exchange rate, to achieve two policy targets. One is internal balance, the other is the external balance. There is no shift in the FF curve as in the earlier cases, because if you see the second equation, it does not have this term dy here. Okay. So this is what happens if there is an increase in labor force. So the simple logic is that when the labor force increases, you need to increase the target level of income. The only way that you can do it is to reduce interest rates, reduce the taxes, so that the aggregate demand increases, incomes go up. Absolutely, absolutely, and it does. No, so you're looking at in this way that when you do this, it tends to increase the imports. As the incomes go up, you take care, you increase the import, so your balance of payment goes into a deficit. And so if there is a deficit, so that depreciation of the currency takes care of that imbalance which is created here. And why it's not reflected in the equations, because whatever you are doing as a first policy change is having an impact on the imports. So you're saying that increase in incomes leads to increase in imports, which is leading to balance of payment deficit. So you need to do something beyond increasing the expenditures. You also need to depreciate your currency so that the balance remains. So this is when you increase the labor force. What happens if there is an increase in capital inflows? What happens if there is an increase in capital inflows? So the first thing, if this happens, is you need to look at this equation. If capital flows goes up, DAG should go up. The expenditures should go up. Now what is the economic interpretation? What is the economic interpretation? That as the capital flows come in, right, the expenditures should go up. Remember, capital flows come in, so there is a balance of payment surplus, right? And when there is a balance of payment surplus, then what happens? Please think of, now you have to refer back to the concept of deficit and surplus. So there is n plus k is equal to 0. So if there is a capital inflow coming in and you have to add up n plus k is equal to 0, so then what it means? That the current account should have been in deficit, which has an impact on the incomes. Remember, the current account deficit has something on the incomes. The incomes have to go down. So the way to, so see what's happening. There's a balance of payment surplus, but the net exports are going down. When the net exports go down, it has an impact on the incomes. The incomes also go down. So the way is to increase the expenditures, to increase the income so that you have the internal balance. And when you have a balance of payment surplus, you know what you should do. If there's a balance of payment surplus, that means if there's the autonomous receipts of foreign exchange is greater than the autonomous payments, then to take care of this, you need to appreciate your currency. Why? Because you want to shift your expenditures from domestic to foreign goods. Then only surplus will be taken care. Now all this what I have told can be seen by the shift of the YY curve. So I am rubbing the shift of the FF curve. I am rubbing this. So from here, DK goes up, DAG has to go up. If DAG has to go up, then you need to reduce the tax and the interest rates. If you have to reduce the tax interest rates, this FF curve shifts down Now see what happens. You are reducing the tax and or the interest rates for maintaining internal balance, and you are appreciating your currency to take care of the capital inflows which has come in, poured in. So you are using two policy instruments to maintain two policy targets: expenditure policy for internal balance, exchange rates for the external balance. Now in the exam I may ask you, say for example I may ask you, what happens if this purely autonomous change in exports, this changes? What happens to the FF curve? What happens to the YY curve? Okay. So we have discussed the case when DNA dash goes up. I may ask you, what happens if DNA dash goes down? Then what changes would you see in the YY and the FF curves? I will ask you, if what happens if this expenditure goes down? Okay. What happens to the YY curve? What happens to the FF curves? And then I will ask you the economic interpretation. So what you need to do is when you get a question like this, you write the equations and then immediately work out that if this changes, what will be the change in this policy induced expenditures. The second thing that you need to do is to work out the economic interpretation. The third thing that you need to work out is whether there will be a shift in only YY curve or only FF curve. Okay? And the fourth thing that you need to remember is that the number of policy instruments should be at least as large as the number of policy targets. If by changing one instrument you are achieving two policy targets, then it is a matter of exception. It's not a rule. Okay. Okay, now let's shift our attention to what Professor Mundell, Robert Mundell was concerned in the 60s. He was concerned about this problem which he called as the assignment problem. It's a problem of pairing instruments with policy targets. It's about choosing appropriate policy instruments for achieving policy targets. And his answer is called the rule of effective market classification. And that rule says that you choose that particular instrument which has the greatest relative effect on that particular policy target. You choose that instrument which has the greatest effect on that particular policy target. That's how you solve the assignment problem. So what I will do is, I will again use the FF and the YY curve to tell you what is this assignment problem and how do we solve the assignment problem. The equations remain the same, so I'm going to rub this portion, the derivation part. So assignment problem is by Professor Robert Mundell, who is also a Nobel laureate, but the first person in the academic field who floated this idea of currency union, having one common currency for a group of regional members. And this he had floated way back in the 60s. So whatever we see in what's happening in Europe, the integration, the theory of that currency union, which is also called OCA, Optimum Currency Area, was given by Professor Robert Mundell. He is the Nobel laureate in 1999, just a year after when our own Professor Sen got the Nobel. So his work was appreciated because of this, because of his work on currency unions, which in international economic parlance is called optimum currency area. So we're going to talk about optimum currency area. It's an exchange rate system which is a fixed exchange rate system. It's like a hard peg. Your currency gets pegged to this common currency. And we're going to see how these adjustments take place. Now if you think about it, it's like a fixed exchange rate. So what you need to think is what happens if there is a switch in expenditure taking place. Okay, if foreigners start liking your goods or you start liking foreigners' goods, and you know that you cannot change the exchange rate, then how would you see the realignments and readjustments? Okay, so this is what he had in mind when he was designing a policy of currency unions, optimum currency area. And if you think about that readjustments, those are some policies which we see that many of these European countries have not been following. So therefore you don't see this currency union working well in the European region. So we're going to discuss about those readjustment policies in the face of hard peg. Okay, so your economy, we are going to talk about first about instruments and policy targets. The rule is that the number of instruments should be as large as the policy targets, and you choose that instrument which has the greater relative effect on policy targets. So here is your economy. You are somewhere, say here, you are above the YY curve, so you see an unemployment in the economy. Anything above YY is unemployment. Anything below YY is set of inflationary conditions. Anything above FF is a surplus in the balance of payments. Anything below FF is a deficit in the balance of payments. Why? Because FF is a set of points which give you external balance. Anything above means that you have adopted more restrictive expenditure policies. When you adopt more restrictive expenditure policies, it tends to reduce incomes, it tends to reduce imports, so you have a balance of payment surplus. Anything above YY more restrictive expenditure policy, you fall below the full employment level of output, so you have unemployment. Below you have deficit and inflationary conditions. So here you are, say for example you are here. Now the managers of the expenditure policy have been given a task. They have been given a task to maintain internal balance. The managers of the nominal and real exchange rate have been given another task. Their task is to maintain external balance. So let the manager who want to maintain the external balance start first. He sees a balance of payment surplus. As soon as he finds that there is a balance of payment surplus, he wants to switch expenditure from domestic to foreign goods. That's possible in a fixed exchange rate. If you change the exchange rate, you appreciate your currency and you move to a point which is on the FF curve. So you appreciate your currency, you are back to equilibrium as far as the external balance is concerned. But you are still below the YY curve, there is still unemployment in the economy. So you want to, now the managers of the expenditure policy come into force. They reduce the interest rates and tax rates to move the economy from here to a point like here where you achieve internal balance. But now once you reach this point, you are below the FF curve. You have a deficit in your balance of payments. So then again the manager who wants to maintain the external balance will do something. Now he finds that there is deficit in the economy. So he depreciates his currency because it will shift expenditures from foreign to domestic goods. But by doing this, he falls below the YY curve, which is like inflationary conditions. So you increase interest rates, tax rates, you move to a point which is on the YY curve, which is above the FF curve. So you have a surplus in the balance of payment. You appreciate your currency, you do this, and through the cobweb phenomena, you reach the equilibrium point. Okay? So this is a case when you have a fixed exchange rate. The instruments are stable. Instruments are stable because by changing the instruments, by changing their values, you are able to move to an equilibrium. Now, it's a fixed exchange rate. Had it been a flexible exchange rate, you couldn't have moved out of the FF curve. I will come to that. If there's a flexible exchange rate, you cannot have a deficit or a surplus in the balance of payments. So you will not be able to move out of the FF curve. So the movements that you would see would be like this, because you'll always be moving in the FF curve. So something like this will happen. You wouldn't move from here to here, you would move from here to here directly, then here to here, here to here, here to here, and then finally to this, if it's a flexible exchange rate. But I have another thing in my mind. What would have happened? This is a case of stable instruments. You are able to achieve the equilibrium. What would have happened if your YY curve was steeper and your FF curve was flatter, and you are here. Now see the cobweb phenomena. if you do this, you will never achieve this equilibrium. So then the first thing that you need to understand is that why is it that the YY curve is now steeper, and why is it that the FF curve is flatter? Can you figure it out by looking at this FF curve and looking at the YY curve? The normal case is when this marginal propensity to save is less than the marginal propensity to import. Sorry, correction. The normal case is when the marginal propensity to save is greater than the marginal propensity to import. This is a normal case. And that's why you see a a steeper FF curve. Now think of an economy which is very open economy like Norway, where marginal propensity to import, where S is less than M. This is a case which is depicted here, where the FF curve will now be flatter and the YY curve would be steeper. In this case, the traditional instruments will not work. So here is what Professor Mandal was intervening and saying, that in this case, where you have a very open economy, the set of instruments that you will have, the role of that instruments will be reversed. Now, expenditure policy will go for maintaining external balance, and the exchange rates would be used for maintaining internal balance. You can see from here, if you have to reach this, see what happens. Now the instruments are changed, nominal and real exchange for maintaining internal balance. So then you depreciate your currency for maintaining internal balance. You shift your expenditure from foreign to domestic good to raise expenditures, to raise incomes. So you reach here, expenditure policy goes, and but when you come here, you're above the FF curve, you have a balance of payment surplus, so you reduce tax rates, interest rates for increasing expenditures, increasing incomes, increasing imports to take care of the balance of payment surplus, but then you fall below the YY curve, you have inflationary conditions. So then you appreciate your currency. You appreciate your currency because this will shift expenditures from domestic to foreign goods. You are below the FF curve, you have a deficit. So you increase tax rates, interest rates, reduce incomes, reduce imports, and so it goes on, and then you finally reach here. So the role of the instruments get reversed in case you find yourself in a situation where the marginal propensity to import is greater than the marginal propensity to import is greater than the marginal propensity to save. So, the concern looks harmless when I write it here, but it has got a deeper meaning when you put it in this framework. Now, the next set of questions that you can ask is that who knows, someone who is sitting in the government, who knows that there is an FF and an YY curve, right? Unless until he strategically uses econometric tools to estimate the YY and the FF equation, you wouldn't know where exactly you are. I mean, you wouldn't know where is the YY curve, what is the shape of the YY curve, unless you know econometrics, because then you can estimate the equation and so on. So then, but what you can know as a person is what type of situation you are facing in your economy, whether you have a balance of payment surplus or and you have unemployment in the economy or inflationary conditions. So then you can change the policies, but then the rule is that the number of instruments should be as large as the policy targets, and then you choose that particular instrument which has the greater relative effect on the policy targets. So when MPM was greater than MPS, expenditure policy had more role to play in maintaining external balance than internal balance. Nominal and real exchange rate had more role to play in maintaining internal balance. Right? So these are some questions. Now think of, what I can do is that think of a case where you have a flexible exchange rates and there are, say, capital flows coming in. So then you would see a shift of the FF curve to the left, but you cannot move out of the FF curve because it's a flexible exchange rate. You cannot have a deficit or a surplus. So you would see a movement like this. You would only see changes in the exchange rates. It will not be a co-op wave phenomena till you reach that equilibrium. Okay. Again, if marginal propensity to import is higher, the traditional instruments will not help you. The role will get reversed. Okay, so we'll end up here, and then we'll see what happens if this is further bifurcated. Remember, it had the fiscal policy and the monetary policy inherent in this, and then what we will see, we'll bring in capital flows. So, and then we'll see what shapes would this YY and FF curve will give us, and then what set of instruments would be needed to maintain internal and external balance. So you will see that in case of capital flows, monetary policy takes the role of maintaining external balance, fiscal policy takes the role for maintaining internal balance in case of higher capital inflows. Okay.
Initial process told us that exchange rates and interest rates will affect the capital outflows or inflows. That is, our investments in foreign exchanges or foreign investments in our bonds.
Yeah.
So would we be including those terms for capital flows?
Yeah, we'll be discussing the Mundell-Fleming model, which is like, which says that in simple words, higher is the interest rates here, higher will be the capital inflows. In that context, we will discuss the risk neutrality of individuals, the risk averse nature of individuals. But that would be a separate exercise than this, because we will continue with that absorption and the elasticity approach, a view that we have taken that they are complementary to each other. What I will try to show to you is that these fiscal policy will go for maintaining the internal balance, and monetary policy will go for maintaining the external balance. And the exchange rates would be as it is in case of capital flows. So, that would be one. And then if you keep on working on this equation, you will get many insights to what happens in the economy and what should the policy makers do in case of the changes in the variables. For us also, India has a managed floating exchange rate. Whenever there are capital inflows or outflows, we tend to change our exchange rate, but within a band. Okay. Officially, we say that we do not follow any of the parameters. We just say that there has to be no speculation. It should be orderly conditions in the foreign exchange markets. But as soon as RBI finds that there is a whole lot of changes taking place, then it intervenes in the market to maintain that parity within a band. So in that sense, this may apply here also.